Hi everyone, Peter here from Movement and Performance, and in this presentation we're going to be covering the topic of post-exercise nutrition and how we can use this to best enhance our recovery and then ultimately optimize the adaptation to our training to enhance our athletic performance. So what are the goals of post-exercise or post-training nutrition? So these are the main things, is that we want to replenish energy stores, and in particular glycogen, because that's what we're going to be using primarily for sport or exercise, to recover our energy systems. So that's going to be, again, talking about the energy stores, that sort of ties into that. To rehydrate, so to actually promote rehydration, and what also comes into play with rehydration is not only liquid but also the electrolytes that are going to promote hydration. And then the last thing is that we want to promote adaptation to our training. So actually enhance the training that we're doing so that we can actually adapt to it optimally. So the general considerations of post-exercise nutrition. So the first thing is that you need to actually understand how much of an impact post-exercise nutrition has, which is not actually all that much if you don't have a solid plan in place first. So if you haven't already checked this video out, you can find nutritional priorities for body composition on this YouTube channel to sort of give you an idea and put everything into perspective, so you can actually create a holistic nutrition plan and not just focus on only the post-exercise nutrition component. But in general, our post-training or post-exercise meal or food should generally be lower in fat, and that's going to be because the fat tends to slow down how quickly the nutrients absorb into our bloodstream. Generally higher in protein, just because we usually have some muscle damaging exercises when we're doing our training. And usually we're going to have sort of a moderate to high intake of carbohydrates, and that's going to be dependent, as we're going to talk about in the later slides, dependent on the type of exercise and the duration of exercise you're doing. And usually we want a good chunk of these carbohydrates to be highly glycemic, that is something that the carbohydrates that absorb rapidly into the bloodstream. So things like white bread, white potatoes, sugary type drinks, that sort of thing. So, but more on the holistic nutrition plan, we need to sort of take all of this with a grain of salt, all the stuff I just talked about. So we need to understand, number one, is our post-exercise nutrition. Is that going to be a separate meal for us? And how many meals are we going to have throughout the day? How many calories do we have dedicated to the post-exercise meal? When did we eat beforehand? What is the next meal we're going to have? All these needed to be taken into consideration when deciding our post-exercise nutrition. So, for example, in this example, if we have 4 meals throughout the day: breakfast, pre-exercise, post-exercise, and dinner, assuming that all 4 meals are going to be roughly equal in calories, so that we're going to disperse them quite equally throughout the day, that's going to look different as opposed to if we have breakfast and we don't eat anything until in the afternoon, and then we have our post-exercise meal and then dinner, something like that. So we need to make sure we take all of this with a grain of salt. The types of exercise we're employed are also going to affect our what our post-exercise nutrition is going to look like. So, for example, for endurance type training, we're going to need a much higher calorie content. So we just need more total food, and in particular, we want much higher carbohydrates because we're going to be utilizing carbohydrates a lot more in endurance training, just because of the high work requirements. For hypertrophy or strength training, we generally want higher proteins, high protein content in those post-exercise meals. Number one, just to get enough protein in through the day, but also number two, because of the high degree of, well, generally the adaptation we're trying to get is anabolic, and the protein's going to promote that adaptation. In terms of speed or power training, it really depends on the session. Again, if it's higher volumes, we probably want more carbohydrates. if it's a real short, sharp session, we probably don't need as much total food in our post-exercise nutrition recovery. And then in terms of when we're talking about competition or matches or something like that, it's no different to training. We're still doing, all the principles stay the same. Your body doesn't know you're doing a competition, and all it sees the competition is as exercise. And also, yeah, so it's going to be dependent on the type of competition. Did you just run a 100-meter sprint? Did you do a marathon? Did you play a soccer match? Etc. So the timing of the post-exercise nutrition is also going to be somewhat dependent, and it's going to be dependent on a few things like the previous meal you had, when did you have that meal, and when you're going to eat next. So in generally, we say that you want to get some sort of food in as soon as possible after exercise, but it's not always necessary. So if you have a really substantial pre-exercise meal 1 to 2 hours before, then you probably still have a lot of those nutrients still digesting and floating around in the blood and are readily available for your body to use, which means that you've already got food in your system. So you don't actually, it's not like if you don't have your post-exercise nutrition straight away, then anything bad is going to really happen. But if you're sort of running low on those nutrients and it was a while away, then having something can actually help. So the further away your meal was and the smaller the meal was, the more important it is to get that post-exercise food in as soon as possible. However, when you have quite a substantial meal not too long before the session, it's not as important. It's the less important it is. Also, when is your next training session? Is it really that important to get in a meal as soon as possible if you have 2 days to recover for your next training session or competition? Probably not. If you have a training session though the same day in a few hours, then it becomes much more important to get your food in as soon as possible. So here are some examples of some post-exercise nutrition meals that you can employ. So for a strength and hypertrophy training session, this example here, so 25 grams of whey protein with 250 mils of skim milk, a banana, and then 2 rice cakes with jam, for example. So in that example, we have about 500 calories, a good amount of protein, a good amount of carbohydrate, and very low in fat. So that's going to be rapidly absorbed by the body because of the low fat content, and it's going to provide enough protein for the rebuilding and repair of muscle tissue and starting to undergo that process, and then enough carbohydrate to replenish glycogen stores and also aid in the process of in the anabolic processes. So in a little bit differently here, we have maybe a soccer match. If we want a post-exercise meal for after a soccer match, we probably need a lot more calories because of the amount of calories we burnt, and probably don't have as high protein requirements, but we probably have much higher carbohydrate requirements. So in this example, 150 grams of pasta with 150 grams of bolognese sauce with beef, 250 mils of skim milk, and then a 600 ml Gatorade. And that way we're getting some good rehydration. We got a lot of calcium from the skim milk, a lot of sodium, and other salts from the Gatorade. And then we have a good amount of carbohydrate from the pasta and also from the Gatorade. Decent amount of protein to make sure we're not in a catabolic state. And again, fairly low in fat because that just slows everything down. And also we have a lot more calories just because we have a lot more carbohydrate. So that's it for this presentation, guys. Hopefully this helped out in some way. Thanks for watching. You can follow Movement and Performance on Facebook and on Instagram with the links here. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe on YouTube for the latest informative videos. So on Facebook and Instagram, you can find these research infographics which are essentially the latest research, but they're summarized into these easy to understand pictures with some good graphics here to help you understand, so that you can stay up to date with the latest research in sports performance training without actually having to go into the journal yourself and reading the entire paper. It gives you basically a brief snapshot of what the study showed. And if you're a curious individual and someone who's interested in learning more about this topic, then I highly recommend you check them out. So thanks for watching, guys, and hopefully you got something out of this video.